Alien girl holds human's hand during a scan, but human sees the scanner tag them as compatible. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main characters. Ethan Wood stood in the dimly lit lab, feeling the cool metal of the equipment under his fingertips as he adjusted the scanning device. The room was quiet, save for the low hum of the machines surrounding him. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. This wasn't the first time he had worked with alien technology, but it was certainly the first time he had ever worked with an alien like Zara. Zara stood across from him, her pale, silver-blue skin glowing softly under the harsh lights, her violet eyes focused intently on the screen in front of her. She was a Zalorian, one of the few alien species that had recently made contact with Earth. Ethan had been chosen for this mission due to his expertise in xenobiology, but this was far more than just a scientific study for him. There was something about Zara that intrigued him, something in the way her eyes seemed to look right through him, as if she could see his very soul. "Ready?" Ethan asked, his voice a little steadier than he felt. Zara gave a small nod, her long, silver hair falling gently around her shoulders. She extended her hand, and Ethan hesitated for only a moment before placing his hand in hers. The warmth of her skin surprised him. It was different from human warmth, somehow more intense, more alive. He quickly brushed the thought aside and activated the scan. The machine whirred to life, its sensors emitting a soft, green glow. As the data began to stream across the screen, Ethan focused on the readings, his mind racing with the possibilities. But then, something unexpected happened. A message flashed on the display. Compatible species identified. Ethan blinked in surprise. He hadn't expected that. He had run scans on other alien species before, but never had he seen a reading like this. The words seemed to pulse on the screen, as if they were alive, drawing his attention. He glanced up at Zara, who was still holding his hand. Her expression was unreadable, but her violet eyes had narrowed slightly, as if she, too, was processing the information. Ethan's heart raced. "Did you see that?" he asked, his voice low. Zara nodded, her grip on his hand tightening ever so slightly. "I felt it too," she said, her voice soft but filled with an intensity that sent a shiver down Ethan's spine. Ethan pulled his hand away slowly, unsure of what to make of the situation. The scanner had tagged them as compatible, but what did that mean? He had never heard of anything like this before, and the implications were both thrilling and terrifying. Zara stepped closer, her movements graceful and fluid. She looked at him with an intensity that made his pulse quicken. "I don't know what this means," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I feel something between us." Ethan swallowed hard, trying to focus on the task at hand. This was science, not whatever this was. But no matter how hard he tried to push it away, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had just shifted between them. Something deep and unexplainable. Zara's eyes met his, and for a moment, the world seemed to fall away. It was just the two of them, standing in that sterile lab, with the hum of the machines in the background. Ethan wasn't sure what would happen next, but one thing was certain. This moment would change everything. The air in the lab felt thick with tension as Ethan took a step back, his mind racing to process what had just happened. The screen in front of him still glowed with the words "compatible species identified," and his heart was pounding in his chest. He looked over at Zara, who was standing silently, her eyes focused on the readout, her fingers lightly tapping the edge of the scanning table. Ethan opened his mouth, but words failed him. What was he supposed to say? He had never encountered anything like this before. The science told him one thing, but the feeling in his chest, the unease in his gut, told him another. Zara finally spoke, her voice low and steady, though there was a hint of uncertainty that he hadn't heard before. "What does this mean for us?" she asked. Ethan swallowed, running a hand through his hair. He had no idea. This wasn't supposed to happen. He was just here to run the scans, to get data for the scientists back on Earth, but this was something entirely different. I don't know," Ethan admitted, his voice tinged with disbelief. He glanced at the machine again, as though the answer might appear there, as if the data could explain the unexplainable. But it didn't. Zara's gaze never wavered, and she took a step closer to him, the intensity in her violet eyes growing. "I feel it too, Ethan," she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. "Something between us. It's not just the scan." Ethan felt his breath catch in his throat as her words sank in. He could feel it too, that strange pull, that connection. It was more than just the scan. It was something deeper, something he couldn't put into words. He stepped forward, not knowing why, but feeling like he needed to. The distance between them felt impossibly small, the air thick with an electric charge. He could see the way her eyes softened as she looked at him, the vulnerability in her expression making his chest tighten. "Zara," he began, but the words died in his throat. He had no idea what to say. He had never been in a situation like this, where science, biology, and whatever this was between them, collided in such an overwhelming way. Zara reached out, her hand brushing against his arm in a gesture so gentle, yet filled with an unspoken understanding. It was as if, in that moment, they both knew something had changed. The world outside the lab, with its rules and expectations, seemed to disappear, leaving only the two of them standing in the quiet of the room. The hum of the machines around them felt distant, insignificant. It was just them, just Zara and Ethan, standing at the edge of something neither of them fully understood, but both felt in their bones. Ethan's hand twitched as if he might reach out to her, but he stopped himself. What did this mean? Could he act on it? Could she? There was so much at stake, so many questions, but in that moment, all that mattered was the undeniable truth that something had shifted between them. Zara, sensing his hesitation, smiled softly, her lips curving in a way that made Ethan's heart skip a beat. "We can figure this out, Ethan," she said, her voice calm and reassuring, though there was a flicker of excitement in her eyes. Together, Ethan nodded slowly, his mind still reeling, but something inside him told him that whatever happened next, he wasn't alone. They weren't alone. The next few days passed in a blur of work and strange tension. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that everything was changing, and it was happening too quickly for him to understand. He had known Zara for only a short time, but already she had become more than just a subject of study. He found himself thinking about her even when he wasn't supposed to be, his mind wandering to the way her skin seemed to shimmer in the light, the way her eyes held so many unspoken questions. The scan results kept replaying in his mind, the words compatible species identified echoing through his thoughts. He had never imagined something like this happening. After all, what were the odds that a human and an alien species could be biologically compatible? And yet, there it was, undeniable and real. He found himself looking forward to seeing her again, despite the whirlwind of emotions he couldn't quite process. Today, he was in the lab, running another round of tests. The machine beeped softly, its usual hum filling the room as Ethan adjusted the settings. He glanced at the door, half expecting to see Zara walk in. His heart skipped a beat when it actually happened. She stepped into the room, her presence immediately filling the space, as if the very air around her shifted. Ethan felt a warmth spread through him, but he quickly masked it, focusing back on the machine. Zara smiled, a soft, knowing expression on her face. "I thought I'd find you here," she said, her voice calm, but with a hint of playfulness. "You seem busy." Ethan chuckled, trying to shake the awkward tension that had been building between them. "Just some routine tests," he said, his voice a little steadier than he felt. "But I think we need to talk about the results." Zara stepped closer, her violet eyes watching him intently. "I agree," she said. "There's something about this that feels different. I'm not sure what it is, but it's hard to ignore." Ethan nodded, his hand running through his hair in a nervous gesture. "I've been thinking about it too," he admitted. "The scans, the compatibility. It's not something I've ever encountered before, and I'm not sure what it means for us." Zara took a step closer, her gaze never leaving his. "Does it scare you?" she asked quietly. Ethan paused, the question catching him off guard. He looked at her, really looked at her, and for a moment, everything else faded away. It wasn't fear he felt. It was something else, something deeper. "No," he said finally, his voice low. "It doesn't scare me. It just confuses me." Zara smiled, and Ethan felt a warmth spread through him at the sight. "I don't have all the answers either," she said, her voice gentle. But maybe we don't need all the answers right now. Maybe we just need to understand what's happening between us. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as he met her gaze. He knew she was right. They didn't need all the answers. Not yet. But something was changing, and neither of them could ignore it. I think you're right, he said, his voice soft. We'll figure it out together. Zara's smile widened, and for the first time since meeting her, Ethan felt like maybe, just maybe, everything was falling into place. He didn't know what the future held, but standing there with Zara, he realized that for the first time in a long time, he was willing to find out. I'm sure Ethan would have said something, but the words stuck in his throat. It wasn't often that he was at a loss for words, but standing next to Zara, feeling the unspoken connection between them, left him feeling vulnerable in a way he hadn't experienced before. He could still feel her presence beside him, her soft breath just barely audible in the quiet room. The machines that filled the lab hummed faintly in the background, but the noise seemed distant, as if it belonged to another world. It felt like the space around them had narrowed, the gap between their worlds shrinking with each passing second. Zara seemed to sense his hesitation and gave him a reassuring smile. You're thinking too much again, Ethan, she said softly, her voice grounding him in the moment. Ethan exhaled, realizing just how tense he had been. I don't know what's happening here, he admitted. I've never felt anything like this before, and I can't seem to shake the feeling that I'm not in control of it. Zara's smile softened, and she reached out, her fingers brushing against his arm in a quiet gesture of comfort. Maybe we don't need to control it, she said, her voice low but steady. Maybe we just need to see where it leads us. Ethan's heart skipped a beat at her words, and for the first time, he realized how much he wanted to follow wherever this was going. But he still had doubts, still had questions. What if it's just biological compatibility, he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. What if this is just a reaction, something that will fade with time? Zara looked at him, her violet eyes deep and thoughtful. Maybe, she said, but I don't think it's just that. Not for me. Ethan met her gaze, and something in his chest tightened. He saw the honesty in her eyes, the sincerity in her words, and in that moment, he couldn't deny what he felt. It wasn't just a scientific curiosity or an experiment gone wrong. It was real, something deeper than anything he had expected when he first agreed to this mission. He had known Zara was different from the start, but now, he understood why. You're right, he said, his voice steady but filled with a certainty he hadn't felt before. Maybe we don't need to control it. Maybe we just need to trust it. Zara's eyes softened, and she took a step closer, her hand gently resting on his. Trust is a good place to start, she said with a smile. Ethan nodded, his heart racing in his chest. He didn't know what the future held for them, but for the first time since meeting Zara, he felt like they were both exactly where they were meant to be. It was no longer about the scans, the data, or even the scientific curiosity. It was about something more, something that went beyond their worlds, their species, and their pasts. In that quiet lab, with nothing but the hum of machines and the soft warmth of Zara's hand in his, Ethan knew that whatever came next, he was ready to face it. Together, Ithaca was the perfect backdrop for their conversation, though it was not what Ethan had expected. The evening sun filtered in through the windows, casting warm, golden beams across the quiet lab. The sterile whiteness of the room seemed to fade in comparison to the space between him and Zara, which now felt comfortably familiar. They had barely spoken in the last few minutes, but the silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of quiet that spoke volumes without the need for words, a quiet that spoke of understanding, trust, and something deeper than either of them could have anticipated. Ethan found himself noticing things about Zara that he hadn't before, how her violet eyes shimmered in the light, how the subtle movements of her fingers made everything seem intentional, every gesture thought through. He wasn't sure when it happened, but the boundaries of professional and personal had started to blur. Zara turned towards him, breaking the silence. Ethan, she said, her voice soft, yet there was a certain depth to it that caught his attention. How do you feel about all this? The question lingered in the air between them, and for a moment, Ethan couldn't answer. What was there to say? He had never been in a situation like this. The connection they shared, the unexpected compatibility. How could he even begin to understand it, let alone explain it? He looked at her, really looked at her, and in that moment, everything made sense. I don't know, he said finally, his voice steady but filled with a sincerity he hadn't realized was there. But I know I don't want to walk away from this. From you. Zara smiled. And in her smile, Ethan saw something that reassured him, a shared feeling, an understanding that didn't need words to exist. I don't want to walk away either, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But I need you to be sure. About us. Ethan felt his heart race again, but this time it wasn't out of fear. It was the kind of rush that came with something new, something that felt both right and uncertain. He stepped closer to her, not thinking about the data, the experiment, or the implications of what this meant. He reached for her hand, the same hand that had scanned him just days ago. The touch was different now, more familiar, more intimate. I'm sure, he said, and he meant it. Zara's smile widened, and for the first time, she stepped closer to him, closing the distance that had once seemed insurmountable. The weight of their worlds, their species, and the unknowns that lay ahead seemed distant now, as if none of it mattered. All that mattered was the space between them, the shared understanding that something had shifted, and in that shift, they had found something extraordinary. Ethan didn't know what the future would hold for them. But as he stood there with Zara, the connection between them growing stronger with each passing second, he realized that whatever came next, they would face it together. And that thought, that certainty, felt like the most important thing of all. Ithaca felt like a distant memory as Ethan and Zara found themselves outside the confines of the lab. The sun was setting, casting a soft orange hue over the landscape. And for the first time since their paths had crossed, Ethan felt the weight of their connection in a new way. The tension that had once been between them, the uncertainty and the questions, had shifted into something else, something simpler and more honest. They walked side by side, the quiet night settling in around them, and though neither of them spoke, the air between them was thick with unspoken understanding. Ethan couldn't help but glance at Zara, her silver-blue skin glowing softly in the dim light, the contours of her face illuminated by the fading daylight. He could feel her presence beside him more intensely than before, like she had become a part of his world in a way he hadn't expected. They had only just begun to explore what this connection meant, but Ethan was beginning to see that the possibilities were endless. What do you think will happen next? Zara's voice broke the silence, and Ethan turned to face her. Her violet eyes were steady, searching, as if trying to gauge how much he was willing to open up. I don't know, Ethan admitted, his voice calm but filled with sincerity. But I think that's okay. I don't need all the answers right now. I just know I want to see where this goes with you. Zara smiled softly, the expression reaching her eyes. I feel the same way, she said, her voice low but filled with a warmth that made Ethan's chest tighten. For the first time, I feel like maybe there's something more here than just compatibility. Something that goes beyond the science, beyond the data. Ethan's heart raced in his chest as he met her gaze. Her words echoed in his mind, and for the first time since they had met, he felt truly seen. Not as a scientist, not as an experiment, but as someone who mattered. I don't know what this is, Zara, he said quietly, taking a step closer to her. But I'm willing to find out. With you. Zara's eyes softened, and she reached out, her hand brushing against his. The touch was light, almost tentative, but it felt like the most natural thing in the world. In that moment, Ethan knew that whatever the future held, it would be worth facing it together. There was no certainty, no clear path, but there was trust. There was connection. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. The stars were beginning to appear in the sky above them, twinkling softly in the vast expanse. Ethan and Zara stood there, side by side, beneath the night sky, feeling the weight of the universe around them, but also the weightlessness of the moment they shared. In a world filled with questions and uncertainty, this moment felt like something that needed no explanation. They didn't need to know what would happen next. They didn't need all the answers. They only needed to trust that whatever came, they would face it together. Ithaca felt distant now, a blur of days passing between their quiet moments in the lab. Ethan found himself waking up each morning with thoughts of Zara, of what had transpired between them in that quiet space of understanding. He was no longer just a scientist studying alien physiology. He was a man on the brink of something new, something unexpected. Their conversations had shifted, as if the world outside had faded, and all that mattered was the bond they were forming. Zara had become something more than a colleague to him. She was no longer just a subject of his research, but a presence in his life, one he couldn't ignore, no matter how much his mind tried to rationalize it. And yet, the uncertainty lingered. What would happen if others found out about them? What would the consequences be? He couldn't help but worry. But every time Zara looked at him with those violet eyes, his doubts seemed to dissipate, replaced by something deeper, something he couldn't name. They had decided to take things slowly, to let whatever was happening between them unfold at its own pace. But time had a way of slipping by unnoticed. It was late afternoon when Zara approached him again in the lab, her presence like a quiet storm. She was carrying a tablet in one hand, but her gaze, as always, was locked on him. "Ethan," she began, her voice steady but laced with something he couldn't quite place. "I've been thinking." Ethan turned from his workstation, his heart skipping a beat. "About?" he asked, his voice soft. "About us," Zara said, her words hanging in the air between them. Ethan felt a sudden tension coil in his chest. It wasn't that he didn't want to talk about it. It was just that. He didn't know where to start. "I don't want to rush anything," Zara continued, taking a step closer. "But I feel like we're moving towards something. And I want to know what that something is. I want to know what this means for us, for the future." Ethan took a deep breath. There it was. The question he had been avoiding. What did it mean? Was this something temporary, a fleeting connection sparked by circumstance? Or was it something deeper, something that could transcend their differences, their species, and whatever limitations they might face? He looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, he felt the weight of the question sink in. "I think it means that I'm willing to find out," he said finally, his voice steady, though his heart was pounding. Zara's eyes softened, and she smiled, a slow, knowing smile that reached all the way to her eyes. "That's all I needed to hear," she said. Ethan felt something in his chest loosen at her words, as if the weight of his uncertainty had been lifted, even if just a little. They didn't have all the answers, and maybe they never would. But in that moment, standing there with Zara, he realized that he didn't need to have it all figured out. They could face whatever came next, together. Zara reached for his hand, her fingers brushing against his in a gesture that felt both familiar and new. He didn't pull away. Instead, he let his fingers curl around hers, the touch simple yet filled with promise. The lab around them seemed to fade away, leaving just the two of them in that quiet moment, a moment that felt like the beginning of something that would change both of their lives forever. Ithaca had become a distant memory, replaced by the steady pulse of time moving forward. Ethan and Zara had found a rhythm of their own, one that existed in quiet conversations and shared glances, in the small moments that seemed to hold more weight than anything else. The lab, once a place of sterile experimentation, had transformed into a sanctuary of sorts, where the boundaries between science and something deeper blurred. Ethan knew that things were changing between them, but each day brought a new layer to their connection. He no longer saw Zara as just a subject of study or an alien being from another world. She had become something far more complex, someone whose presence he could no longer imagine being without. The days were filled with work, yes, but even in the midst of the science, there was a constant undercurrent of anticipation. It was as if the world around them had slowed down, and only they existed in this bubble of understanding. Zara was different now, too. Her confidence seemed to have grown since their conversation in the lab. She moved with a quiet assurance, and Ethan noticed how the subtle changes in her expressions, those flickers of emotion that crossed her face, spoke volumes without her needing to say a word. Yet, despite the newfound intimacy between them, there were moments of uncertainty. Ethan had always prided himself on his logical approach to life, but when it came to Zara, logic seemed to fall away. They had reached a point where words were no longer necessary. But still, the question lingered. What did it all mean? He had spent his life studying the unknown, but now, with Zara, the unknown was something entirely personal. One evening, as they sat together in the lab, the quiet hum of the machines surrounding them, Zara turned to him, her expression thoughtful. "Ethan," she said, her voice soft, "have you thought about what comes next?" Ethan glanced up at her, meeting her gaze. There it was, the question they had both avoided. "Every day," he said, his voice steady but filled with uncertainty. "But I'm not sure what the right answer is." Zara smiled, a small, understanding smile. Maybe there is no right answer, she said. Maybe all we can do is keep moving forward, one step at a time. Ethan felt a weight lift from his shoulders at her words. For so long, he had been trying to make sense of it all, trying to find a logical explanation for the bond they shared. But now, with Zara's words, he realized that perhaps it didn't need to make sense. Maybe the most important thing was to simply be present, to embrace what was happening between them without the pressure of figuring it all out. One step at a time, he repeated, a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. Zara's eyes softened as she reached for his hand, the warmth of her touch grounding him in the moment. In that simple gesture, Ethan felt the weight of their connection, stronger than any scientific explanation, more powerful than any logical analysis. They didn't need to know what the future held. All they needed was to trust in what they had found together. And in that moment, standing beside Zara, Ethan knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. Ithaca had always been a small town in the grand scheme of things, but it now felt like the entire universe to Ethan. The world around him had become both bigger and smaller at once. Bigger, because he had found something he never expected to find, an undeniable connection to someone from another world. Smaller, because despite the vastness of space and the complexities of their different species, everything felt simpler when he was with Zara. They had learned so much from each other in the short time they had known one another, but it was clear that their journey was only beginning. The days had begun to stretch into weeks, and with each passing moment, Ethan felt more certain that what he and Zara shared was not just a fleeting connection. It was something real. Zara, for her part, had adjusted to life on Earth in ways that surprised both of them. Despite her alien origins, she had found a sense of belonging here, with Ethan. She had embraced the challenges of blending into human society, and in return, Ethan had found himself learning more about her than he could have ever imagined. It wasn't just about the science anymore. It wasn't about the compatibility scan or the biological data they had been studying together. It was about the connection, the bond that had grown between them, and how they each made the other feel whole in ways they never expected. Sitting across from her in the lab that afternoon, Ethan found himself smiling without even realizing it. Zara looked up from the tablet she had been reviewing and caught his gaze, her own lips curving into a smile. "What?" she asked, a playful note in her voice. "Nothing," Ethan said, shaking his head. "I just can't believe how far we've come." Zara raised an eyebrow. "From a study to what we are now." Ethan nodded. "Exactly." Zara set the tablet down and leaned back in her chair, her eyes never leaving his. "It's strange, isn't it?" she said. "How quickly everything has changed. It feels like just yesterday we were strangers, and now we're not." Ethan leaned forward, his hands resting on the table. "I think that's the part one didn't expect," he admitted. "How quickly everything felt so natural, like it was meant to be." Zara smiled again, the expression warm and sincere. "Maybe it was," she said softly. Ethan's heart fluttered at the thought. Maybe it was. They didn't know what the future held, and there were still questions to answer. But for the first time since meeting Zara, Ethan realized that the answers didn't matter as much as the present moment. The present, and the feeling of her hand in his, the steady connection between them that neither of them could deny. As they sat there together, the weight of the world felt lighter. They were two beings from different worlds, but in that moment, it didn't matter. All that mattered was that they had found each other in this vast universe. And no matter what came next, Ethan knew that they would face it together.